Okay, in today's video, I want to figure out how to have a brown color on my oil paint palette that is not going to dry overnight. What I've been using is the Transparent Oxide Brown by Rembrandt, and that is drying faster than my other pure color mixtures. And even when I've been adding in a little bit extra walnut oil, I've tried adding clove oil, and even adding other colors, which we're going to do here today, it still dries overnight pretty much, and then I have to remix anything that has to do with using that Transparent Oxide Brown color. So what I want to figure out with this experiment today is, can I mix a nice brown color to replace the Transparent Oxide Brown that will not dry overnight and stay wet and juicy as long as the other colors on my palette do. So I'm going to be working with Winsor yellow. I don't use a lot of yellow in my brown mixtures, but I like having it there just in case. So it's all about the reds when you're mixing a brown from your palette. So I'm going to mix a version of cadmium red light browns using phthalo blue and a little bit of viridian green, and then I'll mix a brown version of that using ultramarine blue with the viridian green. And I'm going to do the same thing moving on down the line with the Venetian red, then the Indian red, and then the quinacridone magenta. And we have our control group here, the Transparent Oxide Brown only by itself. And then we're going to mix a little bit of cadmium red light with the Transparent Oxide Brown. You can see there it's about and then we have the Transparent Oxide Brown with the ultramarine blue. And we're going to see if those dry any more slowly than the Transparent Oxide Brown by itself. And then also compare the drying time to those three colors to the drying time of the mixtures from the pure colors. So let's mix. Okay, the first brown that I'm going to mix, I'm going to use the Cad Red Light. And we're going to mix that with the Phthalo Blue. Start off with about that much. And about that much of the green, viridian green. I find that green, blue, and red tend to make nice browns overall. And I'll be checking these in the morning to see which ones have dried overnight. And then we will continue to check them until all of them have dried. And I'm going to make note of how long it took for them to dry. Because usually after I paint a session, I pop my palette in the freezer and paint again the next day. I can usually do that for just about a week before I need to do a new palette. So that's a nice warm brown, reddish brown. Now if we wanted to make it a little bit more neutral, you can just add more blue or more green and it'll neutralize that brown. It's not a very dark brown because this red is a lighter value red. So to get a darker brown with the phthalo blue, we're going to want to mix that with a Venetian red, which is a little bit darker. And some of that blue. I like to put a little more green than the blue. Already see that's a nice darker brown. That looks pretty close to the Transparent Oxide Brown that we have on our palette. So there's that one. I like that. That's with the phthalo blue and the viridian green. Now the Indian red is even a little bit darker still yet. There's our blue, a little bit more green than the blue. red too. So it doesn't give you that transparency that you get from the Transparent Oxide Brown. So if you want a thicker, more covering brown, this would be the way to get that. It's very similar to the Venetian red. Very similar. You could probably interchange those two colors on your palette if you needed to. All right, let's check out this magenta with the phthalo blue and our green. A little bit more magenta. There we go. This is going to tend to go towards the cooler, more purple brown. It's pretty purple. I think to make that more brown, I'm going to throw in more green. Kill some of that purple. And it's a little better. Still yet more green. The phthalo blue is very powerful. I might have put too much. There's probably, would use that more likely to make a black, because I don't use black on my palette, so that quinacridone magenta with the phthalo and the green would make a nice, very dark valued color. So let's work backwards to mix it up. So I'm going to take the rest of that magenta and I'm going to mix that. I'm going to mix it with just the green by itself. Maybe it's that the magenta is a very strong color, but if you wanted to use it as a cool kind of a brown, I think leave the blue out. That's what I'm discovering here today. If you're using magenta to make a brownish color, don't add any blue. It's still very purpley, but it's a very warm purpley brown. Is that a thing? Maybe. Okay. Oh, you know what? I'll get some in a second. Here goes the Indian red, a little bit of ultramarine blue, and some Viridian. I'm going to get some more of that guy. So I wasn't sure if the phthalo blue or the ultramarine blue, if one would make a difference as far as drying time. The phthalo blue, let's get some more green. The phthalo blue is a warmer blue, while the ultramarine blue is a little cooler. So if you want to keep your browns in the warm family, you may want to go with the phthalo blue or a warm blue. Of the ultramarine in there, darken them up a little bit. Pretty good. We have scotch for more blue. That's looking pretty good. There we go. That is a nice brown. And we'll mix our Venetian red with our ultramarine blue. Get enough green in there to kill the red. When you kill the red, you make brown. There we go. I like that. I'm leaning towards liking the Venetian red as my favorite. I believe we'll see how I feel about it after the drying time's established, but as far as right now with what I've mixed up, I like it. It's a little warmer. This Indian red's giving me a little bit more cool purplish brown color, where the Venetian red's really mixing nicely and becoming a true brown, I feel like. cadmium red light. Mix in our blue and our green. Trying to make it as dark as possible. That's looking pretty good there. So to darken up your brown, you just need to add a little more green. I'm going to try adding a scotch of yellow. That gives you a greenish brown color. Probably the same with this guy. Adding a touch, the tiniest touch of white to your colors really helps you to see the true essence of that color. And it also makes it cooler. So you can see how that grayed down quite a bit. Aloe blue mixture, tiniest bit of white. Might have put a little too much white in that first one. Teensy tiny bit. Just wanted to check the drying time from adding the white, because I do add the white in to get some of the skin tones that I used the brown to create. And I'm mixing this on the glass palette, so I mean, the idea here is to see how long the color will last on my palette. And I'm using a glass palette most of the time. Sometimes I use a wooden palette that I coat with clove oil, but for the most part, it's a glass palette. So it only makes sense that I would test it on a glass palette. And I'm not going to put this in the freezer. I'm just going to leave it sitting here on my table and let it do its thing. I just want to make sure we've got our control group mixed up down here. So the Transparent Oxide Brown is what I'm trying to replace on my palette with colors that I just mix like we've done here, so that they dry more slowly and I can get more paint time out of them. So there, I've mixed it with the Cad Red. The idea here is that perhaps adding in the pure color will slow down the drying time of the Transparent Oxide Brown. However, in my experience, that is not the case. But I wanted to have that on my palette as a control group, just to be sure. All right, so I'll check back in tomorrow and let you guys know how these all ended up drying. Okay, it's been 24 hours since I laid out all these colors, so let's just see how soft that the colors are. So we've got the first row with the Cad Red. That's still perfectly buttery. Coming down here, still buttery, just like I just mixed it. These guys, still buttery. Look at that. The Venetian Red mixture, just like when I first mixed it, super buttery still. Same here. All these guys are buttery. And it's been 24 hours. The Indian Red, which is a little stiffer paint, it's still buttery, but I can tell how, I think the Indian Red might, I mean, you can see it's still very soft. I think the Indian Red might stiffen up faster than the Venetian Red, just because of the body of the paint naturally. This guy's very buttery, very buttery. Now let's see how the Transparent Oxide Brown, not buttery at all. Look at that, it's hard, just over 24 hours. Look at that, hard. Like I can't even, I couldn't use that at all. I'd have to mix, look at that. Hard. 24 hours, dried overnight. Look at that, hard, even with the Cad Red light in it. Hard. Even the ultramarine blue mixture with the Transparent Oxide Brown, hard. So 24 hours later, unusable, unusable, unusable. So Transparent Oxide Brown can only be used for the day you're painting. So if you want a fast drying brown, then Transparent Oxide Brown will be just fine for you. But I like my palette to stay buttery soft, just like the day I mixed it, so I can work with it for a few days, maybe even a week. So if I were painting, I would have brought this out of the freezer, which I didn't even put this in the freezer. It's just been sitting here on this desk overnight without the freezer. These colors may have lasted a little bit longer if I'd put them in the freezer, but you can tell they're still going to dry hard quickly. But I'm going to leave this here another 24 hours, and I'm going to come back and see how these guys are standing up, see if they remain buttery or not. Okay, we've got day 2. It's been 48 hours, and this stuff still hard as a rock. Hard, not usable at all. Okay, it's been 48 hours. The Transparent Oxide Brown, hard, unusable. Mixtures with it, hard, unusable. These guys, oh, look at the cad red. Buttery, smooth, still beautiful. Look at that. I could totally paint with that. This guy too, still smooth and buttery. And he's thin. This guy, smooth and buttery, him too. Could totally paint with those guys. Venetian red, very beautiful, perfect to paint with. I think the Venetian red and the cad red light are going to be my go-to browns from now on. I mean, look at that, buttery, beautiful, just like I had just mixed it. These guys are buttery still too, even though they're thin. The Indian red, it's still buttery. It just has a thicker consistency, that's all. It's a little bit stiffer, but it's still totally perfectly usable like day 1. I think this one's a little stiffer, look at that. So this has, well, it was a little thinner too, and it had the ultramarine blue mixed in. So it looks like maybe the ultramarine blue mixtures may dry. Yeah, look at that. Huh. So the Indian red and the ultramarine blue dry a little faster than the Indian red and the phthalo blue. And I can see there's starting to be a film buildup on the ultramarine blue. So it's drying, whereas the phthalo blue, no film, completely buttery. So when mixing your browns, if you want them to stay buttery and beautiful, use the phthalo blue instead of the ultramarine blue, and it will keep your paints perfectly buttery nice longer. That's really cool to know. Even my titanium white's still buttery, but that ultramarine blue's drying up. And look, the green is barely in here, and it's still buttery. So what have I learned here? I have learned that I will mix my browns with cad red light, Venetian red, and phthalo blue, and viridian green. And my lighter versions, I can add a touch of white if I want, and I can add a touch of yellow, but that's starting to dry, look at that. So if you add a touch of the, oh yeah, that's stiff, totally stiff. If I add a touch of the Winsor yellow, it's going to toughen them up. So look at that red, beautiful. I'm not even gonna add a touch of yellow to it. I will add a little white if I wanna lighten it. Cad red light, phthalo blue, viridian green, Venetian red, phthalo blue, viridian green, little bit of titanium white or flake white will lighten those mixtures if you need them lighter. I think that will conclude my experiment. So this glass palette has been sitting out for really 3 days. I mixed it on Saturday. I checked back in on Sunday. It was 24 hours. And today, Monday, 48 hours later. So if you're struggling with browns on your palette and the rest of your colors are staying buttery and useful, and your browns are drying out quickly and not useful, so you have to remix them, then mix your browns with these 2 reds, phthalo blue and viridian green. Yes. All right, guys. I hope that helped, and I'll see you in the next one.